Part 1. Hidden wealth on the frontier. Gold was supposed to mean freedom. You dug it from the riverbed, panned it from the stream, or pulled it out of a claim with your bare hands. It sparkled in the sun like it had been waiting centuries just for you. But out here in the West, gold wasn't freedom, it was a curse that painted a target on your back the moment you touched it. Every town from Deadwood to Tombstone knew the same truth. Carry gold the wrong way, and you wouldn't carry it long. Saloons smelled of whiskey, but under the smoke was the sharper scent of paranoia. A man who jingled when he walked was already halfway to a shallow grave. So folks learned to hide their wealth in ways that looked absurd to outsiders, but made perfect sense when every set of eyes in the room might be measuring your pockets. The first trick was the boot. A cowboy's boots were worth more than the horse sometimes, and they carried more than spurs. Gold dust wrapped in oilskin packets slid neatly under the insole. A few coins stitched into the lining gave a man a heavy step, but nobody questioned. A cowboy's gait. If someone wanted your wealth, they'd pat your vest, search your saddlebag, maybe tear apart your bedroll. Rarely would they wrestle a man's boot off while the town marshal strolled the boardwalk. Boots were safety vaults with spurs. Then came the belts. Not just any belt, but thick leather ones with hidden seams. A careful hand with an awl could slide coins into the fold, stitch it shut, and polish it until it looked no different from the store-bought kind. Some belts could carry enough to buy a small herd. When worn every day, they felt like ordinary weight, but to a thief, it was nothing but a plain strap holding up dusty trousers. Invisible treasure strapped around your waist. Gold dust was harder. The fine stuff jingled too softly to warn you, but too loudly to stay safe. Clever folks tucked it in tobacco pouches, pretending they carried nothing more than snuff. Others packed it inside hollowed-out pipe stems or tiny vials hidden with medicine bottles. You could take a draw at the table, puff smoke into a card, players' eyes, and no one would guess that a fortune rattled against your teeth with every pull. And then there were the nails. Some said desperate miners pressed flakes of gold under their fingernails, hiding specks like dirt. Nobody could tell if the grime on your hands was sweat, dust, or a future fortune. Of course, you could only carry so much that way a sliver. Here, a glint there, but for men who trusted no one, even that was enough. If the worst happened, you at least took some of your claim with you, invisible, carried in plain sight. Every method came with its own risks. Coins in boots could rub your feet raw. Belts grew stiff with hidden seams. Tobacco pouches might spill if you weren't careful, turning a smoke break into a glittering disaster. And fingernails broke easier than trust. But out on the frontier, nothing was simple. You chose the discomfort of your disguise over the certainty of being robbed. Stories spread faster than stagecoaches. Around campfires, cowboys told tales of men so paranoid they swallowed nuggets, planning to retrieve them later, though nobody could say if the story was true or just a grim joke told after too much whiskey. Others whispered of miners who stitched gold dust into coat hems, layer by layer, so the garment grew heavier every season. By the time the dust storm settled, the man was walking around with a fortune disguised as a shabby trail coat. The smarter ones spread their wealth thin, a few coins in the boot, some dust in a pouch, one or two sewn into a saddle horn. That way, if a robber took one stash, you still had another. Outlaws didn't have the patience for thorough work. They wanted jingling pockets, not a scavenger. Hunt across a man's wardrobe. So when you picture a cowboy riding into town with gold, don't imagine him with bags slung over the saddle like a traveling banker. Picture him looking ragged, boots scuffed, belt cracked, fingernails dirty, tobacco pouch worn thin. To anyone else, he looked broke. But hidden in those humble details was a fortune he prayed to live long enough to spend. The West taught a cruel lesson: the heavier your pockets, the shorter your future. So cowboys, miners, and drifters learned to make their fortunes vanish into the ordinary, into boots, belts, pipes, nails, and dust. The trick wasn't carrying gold. The trick was carrying it without letting anyone know you had it. Part 2. Tricks of the Trail. Frontier was a place where gold could vanish quicker than whiskey. From a saloon glass, everyone wanted it, and everyone feared losing it. That tension bred 1,000 tricks, small acts of ingenuity. That kept a man's claim hidden long enough to see another sunrise. Some were clever, some desperate, and a few so strange they lived only as campfire rumors. One of the oldest tricks was the fingernail stash. A prospector with nothing but flakes and dust would press them under his nails, grit mixing with dirt until no one could tell where soil ended and fortune began. It wasn't comfortable, and it wasn't much, but a man could ride days with 10 tiny pockets that no thief would bother to check. Under lantern light, those hands looked like every other pair, calloused, grimy, and poor. But hidden in the dirt was the glitter of survival. Hair carried its share of secrets too. Long hair tied with cord could hide slivers of gold leaf, tucked like ribbons into braids. Beards became hiding places, with dust sprinkled and combed in so it clung like ordinary trail filth. Outlaws never thought to shave a man to check his wealth. Besides, a beard already made a face less recognizable. So the rumor spread. Some men carried fortunes in their whiskers, and no one ever knew. Clothing was another battlefield of deception. Jackets and trousers came alive with secret seams. A miner with steady hands could split a hem, slide in a coin or two, and stitch it back so neat even a mother wouldn't notice. A row of brass buttons might actually be hollow, each one screwed tight with a pinch of dust inside. Belts, boots, and now even coats turned into safes that walked. A man dressed ragged might still be carrying enough gold to buy a ranch outright hidden in the stitches nobody thought twice about. Then there were the everyday objects. Hollowed-out knife handles, tobacco tins with false bottoms, cartridge belts stuffed with something other than powder and lead. One miner carried his wealth inside a harmonica no one dared to steal, the instrument of a man who kept the night lively round camp. Another hid nuggets in a Bible's hollowed pages, the last place a thief would flip open while running through a saddlebag. Faith, it seemed, doubled as a vault. Horses helped too. Saddles were stitched thick enough to swallow. Coins in the seams. A saddle horn, worn smooth by years of rope, might hide a hollow core filled with dust. The saddlebag itself was a decoy. Robbers always slashed it open, found the bait inside, and rode away satisfied. The real wealth was sewn under the lining, safe from casual knives. Clever men even carried fake pouches filled with pebbles that jingled convincingly. A robber got his prize, the cowboy kept his life, and both rode off thinking they'd won. Or still, paranoia never slept. Some men buried their gold in the ashes of campfires, marking the spot with stones only they would recognize. In the morning, they rode on light, appearing poor. Weeks later, on the return journey, they would dig up the treasure if luck and memory held. Many didn't. Storms, floods, or simply the hand of time erased more maps than any thief. The prairie kept secrets better than men ever did. And of course, there were the whispers. Around saloon tables, folks swore they knew a fellow who stitched gold dust into his wounds, or who carried nuggets beneath patches of skin. Whether true or not, these stories spread like wildfire. Maybe they were cautionary tales meant to scare greenhorns. Maybe they were exaggerations born from whiskey and paranoia. But in the West, even a rumor was enough to change a man's habits. If someone might be hiding gold under his very skin, suddenly every scar looked suspicious. The game was never just about outsmarting robbers, it was about outsmarting suspicion itself. You wanted to walk through town invisible, your fortune disguised as ordinary dust on your boots. You wanted to sit at a poker table with men who would kill for an ounce of yellow metal and have them believe you couldn't afford another round. The greatest disguise wasn't the boot, the belt, or the seam. It was poverty. A man who looked broke was safer than a man who jingled. That's how the West worked. Wealth that pretended to be worthless. Treasures stitched into rags, gold dust, carried in nails, hair, seams, and saddles. Tricks upon tricks, all designed for one purpose: to make the richest man in the room look like the poorest. Out here, invisibility was worth more than gold itself. Part 3. Paranoia and Betrayal. Funny thing about gold is that it shines even when it's hidden. A man could swear he looked poor, swear he kept his boots patched and his belt cracked, but there was always something in the way. He carried himself, a glance too quick, a silence too heavy, a bootstep that clinked if you were listening close. And in the West, men listened too closely. That's why paranoia traveled faster than stagecoaches. You didn't just hide gold from strangers. You hid it from the very men you rode with, out on the trail. 3 days from town and 2 weeks from law. Trust was a luxury nobody could afford. More than one partnership ended because someone noticed the other's coat growing suspiciously heavy, or a saddlebag that seemed to carefully guarded. Cowboys shared beans, coffee, jokes, even bullets, but not gold. Around the fire, eyes shifted when the conversation turned toward claims or paydays. Men slept with boots on, not because they expected to ride at dawn, but because boots could hide more than spurs. A man who snored too loudly might wake to find a partner tugging at his belt, not out of mischief, but out of hunger for that yellow metal. So people invented layers of defense. A false pouch here, a decoy bag there, nuggets sewn into saddle horns while an obvious canvas sack rattled with worthless stones. If someone went rifling through your gear, you wanted them to find something, anything that satisfied their greed. Without costing your life, decoys became as common as revolvers. And in many camps, they saved more lives than bullets did. But betrayal didn't always look like a gun drawn in the night. Sometimes it looked like a smile over morning coffee, a partner who offered to hold your stash for safety, a friend who suggested burying the gold together and splitting it fair later. Many a prospector found his fortune reduced to ashes because he trusted the wrong set of teeth. In a land where law was a rumor, betrayal was just another kind of weather, unexpected, merciless, and impossible to escape. The campfire itself became a vault. Men buried their gold beneath last night's ashes, marking the spot with a stone or a bent twig. To an outsider, it was nothing but dead firewood. To the owner, it was tomorrow's hope. The trick worked until the next rider came along, curious enough to poke through the coals. More than one cowboy returned to cold ashes and colder luck. And then there were the legends, stories told with low voices in saloons, men who carried gold in their scars, hidden beneath patches of skin, miners who swallowed nuggets so no one could take them by force. Whether true or not, those stories made every scar suspicious, every cough a reminder that maybe someone had a fortune rattling inside him. It wasn't just about what people did, it was about what others feared they might do. Fear itself did most of the work. Even towns couldn't cure the paranoia. A man stepping into a bank looked over both shoulders, wondering if the clerk himself might be tempted. Saloon keepers watched their customers too carefully, lawmen too casually. Everyone knew what everyone else wanted. The line between protector and predator blurred with every round of whiskey poured. That's why the smartest hands didn't carry all their gold at once. A little in the boot, a little in the belt, a little hidden under the ashes of a cold fire. Spread thin enough, the loss of one stash wouldn't ruin you. Outlaws were impatient. They wanted quick grabs, not a scavenger hunt. But even then, no. One slept easy. The West had no locks strong enough to hold back greed. The only real safety was suspicion. That's why cowboys rode with their heads low, eyes always scanning the men beside them, ears sharp for the sound of a partner's step. In the night, gold didn't just make enemies of strangers, it made strangers of friends. Part 4. The West keeps its secrets. Gold was heavy, and so were the stories it left behind. The frontier was scattered with men who swore they'd get their treasure home, yet their names never made it past the next town sign. Somewhere between the claim and the bank, between the saloon and the stagecoach, the West reached out its long fingers and kept both the man and his wealth. The trails themselves became graveyards of hidden fortunes. Cowboys buried coins under rocks, carved secret marks into cottonwoods, or scratched directions onto scraps of leather. Storms erased the markers, floods shifted the riverbeds, coyotes carried off the leather, and suddenly the map was gone. What remained was rumor. There's a stash under that ridge. There's gold in the ashes of that old camp. The prairie collected legends the way banks collect interest. Some treasures did make it home, but at a cost. A man who arrived with gold dust stitched into his coat often found himself changed. His eyes darted at every knock on the door. His hand stayed close to his belt, and sleep was lighter than a prairie breeze. You could take a man out of the West, but you couldn't take the West out of the man. Once you'd carried wealth hidden under your very skin, Trust was a language you forgot how to speak. Lawmen offered no guarantee. A sheriff might guard your gold on Monday and gamble it away by Friday. Stagecoaches hired. Shotguns, but ambushes, still lined the gullies. Banks locked vaults, but more than one teller disappeared with the keys. In the West, protection was just another word you rented by the day. Permanence belonged only to the land. That's why so much gold stayed behind not. Stolen, not spent, but absorbed. Hidden in seams that rotted away, in boots abandoned under desert suns, in saddles left to mold in ghost towns. The land learned to keep secrets better than men ever could. Every ghost town is a vault without walls, every dry creek a reminder that someone once believed fortune flowed there, and the stories never stopped. Round saloon tables, old-timers leaned in clothes. There's a ranch out by the Pecos with gold sewn into the rafters. There's a trail north where a prospector buried his coins under a crooked rock. Truth, lie, or somewhere in between, the whispers kept travelers awake at night, wondering if they were riding past fortunes too well hidden to find. The cruelest irony was that most gold never bought the life it promised. It bought suspicion, betrayal, and sleepless nights. Men carried it under nails, in belts, inside saddles, even if the stories were true under their very skin. But few lived long enough to spend it the way they dreamed. By the time they reached town, they were poorer in trust, older in years, and sometimes lighter by the very fortune they worked to protect. The West didn't care. It never asked for receipts. It kept the gold, kept the secrets, and kept the legends alive. Today, when you walk through a ghost town or ride along a dry creek, you're not just treading on dust, you're stepping over vaults, over stories, over men who thought they were smarter than fate. So how did they carry gold without being killed? Boots, belts, seams, pouches, decoys, and 1,000 small tricks of desperation. But the real answer is this: most didn't. They carried it far enough for the land to notice. And then the land claimed it, the way it always does. Out here, the horizon is long, memory is short, and gold belongs not to men but to the West itself.